Folks, I have just released the final chapter for my webcomic Dormant. It is out. You can go read the full series. And at the end, I have also announced what I will be working on next. Check it out if you're interested. Now, here's the real video. I don't know if I'm doing this right. I don't really have enough tinfoil to, fully mold around my head there. Probably enough to pose for the thumbnail, I guess. The Winds of Winter, one of the most infamous unreleased books in all of literature. The status of this book has been the topic of so much speculation over the years, but more so now than probably ever. Because if you have been out of the loop, there have been quite a few things pointing to us potentially, maybe, learning something soon. And I kind of want to talk about that today, but first go into a bit of history about this book and some of the theories as to why we recently passed the 13th anniversary of A Dance with Dragons and we still don't have that 6th book. And we will move that into the more recent stuff happening and why I think we may be getting this book soon. In fact, I feel like George may have even finished it. Go ahead, call me crazy, say I'm coping, I do not care. Will this video age horribly as early as a couple weeks from now? It's quite possible. But is there a non-0% chance that I am right about everything? Yes? None of this is meant to be taken super seriously, we're just having a bit of fun, but I do need this book. So, yeah. So back in the early 90s, Mr. George Richard Raymond Martin began working on A Song of Ice and Fire, a big epic fantasy series that he envisioned as a trilogy. As he started writing it, he quickly realized that he was very bad at guessing the length of things, both the length of time and the length of pages. And what was once a trilogy became a 6-book series, of which the first 3 books finally released in quick succession in 96, 98, and 2000. While still very far from its height with popularity, the series was met with great critical and commercial success, and George began working on the next leg of the series. But you see, the time between the 3rd book, A Storm of Swords, and the 4th book, A Feast for Crows, was 5 years, much longer than the gaps had been so far. Because once again, the project proved to be growing quite a bit larger than George had envisioned. You see, A Dance with Dragons, which was the original title for the 4th book, ended up being so big, so massive, expanded the story in so many different ways, that the publishers were just like, no, we can't release this. So he was essentially forced to take the 1 book and split it into 2. And the first half of that came out in 2005. But we wouldn't actually get part 2 until 6 years later in 2011. And looking at the history of A Feast for Crows, it kind of makes sense why it took this long. Because not only did he have the complicated task of splitting these books up and, moving the series forward, but the book in general is just far larger than A Feast for Crows. I believe it's actually the longest in the series. And after A Dance with Dragons was finished, of course, he began work on the 6th installment, Winds of Winter, with no intention of having it be so large that he would have to split it again. And it is now 2024, and we still don't have it. But why is that? Well, we may never really know for certain, but there are a few theories of what went down behind the scenes, and I kind of want to talk about those, because they're kind of interesting. So the first big theory is that George, at some point, just restarted the book. This is corroborated by a few different posts that don't really have any credibility, but they do make sense. They say that he basically wrote the entire book and submitted it to the publisher, and they rejected it, because it was apparently a gigantic mess. Now, George is a fantastic author, and it seems kind of weird that he would put out something like this, but when you consider, what Winds of Winter actually has to be, I don't know, it kind of makes sense to me that, a first draft of it would not go so well. Because you essentially have to take the story of these 2 books, which was just so gigantic, and condense it back down into 1 book, while at the same time having, a lot of forward plot momentum and setting up the finale. It is no easy task, no matter how skilled an author you are. And this was around 2017, 2018 when these rumors were swirling around. And if we go back to the timeline of these book releases, from 2011 to 2018 or so, that's kind of in line with what's been happening. We had 5 years for Feast, 6 years for Dragons, which was longer, and with Winds being the longest one yet, it's not really a stretch to think it would take him 7 years or more. And it stands to reason that if he started over, it might take him 6 or 7 years to write it again. And where does that bring us, ladies and gentlemen?
24.
Now, while I think some of this theory could definitely be accurate, it does have some holes. I think the idea that he started over completely from scratch is a bit ridiculous. Like, to me, there is no way that, like, an entire book he wrote would be completely unusable. Obviously, a lot of the same events might be happening, just might be written differently. Also, it's pretty common for people to think that George has rewritten the story because of the reception to the ending of the show. While he may have taken that into account, I don't really think it's all that likely. I mean, his vision was always going to be different from the show, and also I don't think he particularly cares either. But I do highly doubt it's likely he started completely over. But I do think some of this may be true. You know, Winds is such a gigantic undertaking. I think it's very likely that he ran into some snags along the way. Which leads into the next theory, which I think is far more likely. Yeah, he was just not consistently working on it very much these past 13 years. Now, I'm going to assume that George is not a liar, okay? And I do not believe that he is. I said before, yes, he can not be very good at guessing and predicting things, but I have no reason to believe that he has ever maliciously told a lie with the intent to mislead. So when all the way back in 2011 he said he had hundreds of pages of Winds written, I believe him. With how publishing works, I mean, he probably finished Dance like maybe even a year before it came out, so it makes sense he would have had time to start the 6th book. The issue, though, is that he would not give another significant update for almost a decade. He would always say he had a significant amount of Winds written, hundreds of pages even, but never anything concrete. And this led a lot of people to speculate that he had not really been working on it at all. And this also kind of makes sense when you consider just how much more work he had to do in the 2010s than pretty much at any other point in his career. Of course, the show started right before the 5th book came out, and it really shot him from being, you know, a well-respected fantasy author to one of the most famous authors of all time. And he suddenly found himself doing a ton of press for the series, and being signed on to much larger projects to help develop other shows for HBO, as well as screenwriting stuff for the main show. And that's not even to mention other projects like Elden Ring or Wild Cards. I mean, even if he hadn't been working on Winds, you can't really say that the guy is lazy or unproductive. And of course, pairing this with the insurmountable challenge of writing Winds of Winter, it also makes sense to me how he just might not have been writing it at all during this period. It was not until COVID hit that for the first time in years we finally started to see George actively talking about writing it and making significant progress. All the times he would talk about it before would always just be vague comments like, oh, it'll happen when it's happening, I'm still working on it, don't worry, I've got hundreds of pages written. But ever since 2020, he got into more specifics, talking about, you know, certain things he was writing that day, how far along in the book he was, and it led us to the last concrete progress update we got at the end of 2022, where he said the book was 3/4 finished. If he did a lot of work on the book before the mid-2010s and then picked it up again in the 2020s, worked for a few years, got to 75%, I do not think it is a stretch to think that in just another couple of years, he'd hit that 100. And of course, where does that bring us?
25.
Now, any part of these two theories could be right or wrong, and, you know, at the end of the day, there are so many factors that, you know, play into this, that unless George tells us, we'll probably never know for certain, you know, what the exact writing timeline of this book was. But I do think it very interesting that taking these two theories into account, they both lend it to be very plausible that George is almost, if not already, done the book. But these theories don't necessarily explain why so many rumblings have been happening now. Why is suddenly everyone making video on Winds of Winter? Why are so many articles coming out speculating about, oh, it might be time? Well, we are once again going to be turning to Mr. Martin. As I mentioned, you know, when it was clear that he was actually working on the book, he would always give us a bit more details than just being super vague about it like he used to be. And recently, his blog posts have been a bit interesting, like these ones, titled Words of Wisdom. Now, George ain't an idiot. He knows what he's doing here. And now, like, he could just be completely trolling. He's like, I'm never releasing this book. Screw these guys. Let's just send him into a frenzy. But I don't know, man. And, like, paired this and the captions, like, to me it feels like something happened. It feels like something good happened, and he just can't tell us yet. And of course, he has been in the media a lot recently because of the ongoing House of the Dragon Season 2, but the way he has been talking about the books has felt a bit different to me. As he is talking about Winds of Winter more, he's talking about A Dream of Spring, he's talking about Blood and Fire, he's talking about more Duncan Egg novellas. And I'm here thinking, why would he do this? For years and years before, he was never openly talking about all his future projects, like, as liberally as this. He used to talk about them all the time, but as it became more clear that, you know, not much was happening, he definitely toned it down. But here he is now talking about putting out more Duncan Egg novellas before that show, you know, like, passes the books. And to me, it reads like confidence. Again, George is not an idiot, okay? And he is old. He knows that in the grand scheme of things, he does not have as much time compared to a lot of other writers. His mortality has been like one of the most anxiety-inducing things for Song of Ice and Fire fans, because he has stated before that he does not want another author to finish this series, but if things keep going as they have, then he might not be able to finish his series. But the fact that he is openly talking about what's coming next, the fact that he keeps mentioning Winds of Winter, and he also said recently that, like, when it happens, there's going to be, like, a big announcement for it. A big announcement? It's not Worldcon in August, is it? Which you will be attending? House of the Dragon's already been renewed. We already know about A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. And he's talked in the past about, you know, well, bringing the finished manuscript to Worldcon. Listen, I'm not saying Winds of Winter will be announced in just a couple weeks at Worldcon. I just genuinely do not think that George would be so openly talking about all of this if stuff wasn't happening. Based on what he says, to me, it reads like he is confident that all of this stuff will come out. And the biggest driving force behind that may be the fact that he's already done Winds. That he finished it, made that cryptic blog post, sent it off to the editors, and is now gearing up for a reveal at Worldcon. Now, I was probably going to make this video without this last piece of evidence, but I actually think, like the past week when we learned about it, it's one of the most strongest indicators that something is coming yet. The fact that in October, after over 10 years, the main series is getting a new set of covers. And as I've talked about before, this is a very common trend in the industry when there is a new entry in a series coming out after a long period of time. You know, they did it with Mistborn, they did it with the Fragile Threads of Power, they did it with Percy Jackson here. No matter what series it is, like, this is a very common practice. So common that it even happened to A Song of Ice and Fire back when The Dance of Dragons came out. And what better way to promote your new editions of your books than with the promise that a new one is just around the corner. Again, this is not concrete proof, you know, it's entirely possible they just think it needs a facelift. I'm actually a bit mixed about it, because I definitely prefer these covers to these ones. They have cool art, but I don't know, it doesn't really feel super Song of Ice and Fire to me, and I'll be a bit disappointed if they don't do that style of cover for Winds, but whatever, I'll buy it anyway. But yeah, just the timeline of this feels perfectly aligned, with all of the theories pointing to, you know, 2024, 2025, when George might finish the book, all of these things moving, the new covers, the Worldcon. This may sound completely crazy, you may think I have overdosed on copium, but you can't deny that I at least have some reason to believe that something might happen. Please, please, God, I just want this book, and I finished Dance last year. Bro, people have been waiting 13 years. I don't have the constitution those people have. I will lose my mind if this does not happen, like, sometime soon. Just give it to me, George. Give it to me. Anyway, thank you all for watching and for voting for this video on the poll. The Farseer review is next. Leave all thoughts on Winds, all things Game of Thrones in the comments down below. And I will see you next time. If nothing happens at Worldcon, this is going to look ridiculous. Oh my god.